elevating the discussion while talking about the things that matter most. You're listening to Society and the State, Life, Liberty, and Your Pursuit of Happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm excited about this episode because it's a topic that I've read a lot about, written a little about, and now we have the expert come in to share her insights. We're talking today with Lenore Skenazy. She's the author of a book I recommend called Free Range Kids: How to Raise Safe, Self-Reliant Children Without Going Nuts with Worry. Lenore, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both. I know there's another one of you lurking back there.
Oh, yeah. Brian's in the shadows. So tell us, I want to talk first, Lenore, about, there's an interesting story behind the book. You didn't just spontaneously decide to write a book about free-range kids. There was actually something happened where you got labeled America's Worst Mom, which is quite the distinction. How has that title applied to you? What happened that prompted all of this?
Well, it was so long ago already, but way back, actually it's about 9 years ago, our 9-year-old son started asking my husband and I, we live in New York, if we could take him someplace he had never been before and let him find his own way home on the subway. And we had to talk about this because my husband, who you never hear of as America's worst dad, we had to talk about whether this made sense because we have an older son who hadn't asked this. But we decided, the city is very safe at this point, and there's a lot of people on the subway. I think there's safety in numbers, and our son wanted to do it, and we felt that, well, if he was ready, we were ready. So I took him to Bloomingdales one day, beautiful Bloomingdales department store, and I left him in the handbag department to find his own way home because the entrance to the subway is right below the handbag department. Mm-hmm. And when he came home on his own, taking the subway and then a bus across town, he was so excited and proud and happy that a couple months later, when I didn't have anything to write about because it didn't strike me as that big a deal, I wrote a column, Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone. And 2 days later, I was on the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, and, for contrast, NPR. And that's when I started getting this label, America's Worst Mom, because how had I dared to let my son do anything? And that's when I started realizing that that's what our culture has become, that if you actually trust your kid and trust your own parenting and trust your city, you're considered a bad mom for not worrying so much that you don't let them do anything on their own.
So, Lenore, tell us, where did this shift happen? We've become a fear everything kind of society, but I would wager that you and Connor and myself probably grew up with a less fearful mindset in our households. Would that be the case?
It's totally the case. Basically, if you talk to anybody who spent their childhood in the 70s or most of the 80s, they remember leaving the house, slamming the door shut, bye, I'll be home later, and taking their bikes and riding around outside with their friends until the streetlights came on, or going to the park, or certainly walking to school. And today, I think it's 11% of kids walk to school. And when you pass by the parks, they're empty. I keep wondering, aren't people embarrassed that their parks are empty? What are they there for? But I think, as we'll be talking about soon, I can give you one example of a mom whose 7-year-old was playing in the park that she could see from her own porch. She wasn't out on the porch, but if she went out there, she could see her kid playing in the porch, and the kid was there for an hour and then picked up by the police and taken to the station, and then the police came back and talked to the mom, and she said, well, she was playing in the park for an hour. And the policewoman was quoted in the article as saying, an hour is a long time for a child to be alone anywhere, especially in a park. And if that's becoming the philosophy, we're talking about society and the law. If society believes that a child playing in the park is a crazy thing instead of a normal thing, well, then you're going to have a lot of interference in the lives of parents who were raised like us and believe we can give our kids that old-fashioned childhood of playing outside or being unsupervised some of the time, and that being a good thing, not a bad thing.
Lenore, as I look at the data, violent crime has actually declined since the period you were just referring to decades ago. Violent crime has consistently been declining. And so from your vantage point, you would probably argue that, well, look, it's, in fact, safer today for children than it was back then when, so many of us had those freedoms. What then do you attribute it to that while the violent crime has been declining, the actual dangers and threats to children have been declining, it's almost like the helicopter parenting has increased? To what do we attribute that trend?
Well, in my book, I attribute it to four things, but I'm going to whip us through that. But I think there's a fifth thing now that is making us so afraid. And the big four were the media. My mom was raising me, and she sent me to walk to school, basically at age 5. She couldn't name, J.C. Dugard, Eitan Pates, Elizabeth Smart. There was not this catechism of tragic kidnappings that she could just call upon, immediately, like name 10 of them on each finger of each hand, the way we can now. So the media discovered that the best way to keep viewers engaged and readers reading is the story of basically a white middle or upper middle class kid who got kidnapped by a stranger. So the fact that this crime is extraordinarily rare doesn't matter, because on TV it's not rare. On TV you see it on the news, and then you see it repeated in the drama shows. And for a while, Elizabeth Smart was hired by, I think it was ABC, to be their missing child correspondent. So it's like news, weather, sports, and missing children. It just became like a normal category of things you saw on TV, and it seemed as common as another commercial for Coca-Cola. When you live in a litigious time, this is the reason we're scared, number 2, you start thinking like a lawyer, and once you think like a lawyer, nothing seems safe enough. There are school districts out in Washington State that have gotten rid of their swings because they're afraid that if a child falls off a swing is so dangerous and they'll be sued. So you stop seeing any benefit to any kind of independence. All you see is the risk, possibly the legal risk, and you start being afraid of normal life and letting kids partake in that. 3, you have an expert culture. Experts tell you what you're doing wrong. You read Parents Magazine. They'll tell you that you can't let your kids have a play date at home when they're old enough to stay home alone, because what if there's a squabble? You want to be there to jump in. Children are just seen as being in danger all the time, and your job, the experts tell you, is to hover. And then there's the marketplace, which sells products that make you feel like your kid is in danger too, products that will track where your kid is going and alert you if they go off their path, with the assumption being that the second that they wander off, it's not to pet a dog or to sneak a candy bar from the local deli. It's somebody's thrown them in a trunk and off they're going. So all those things make us more scared. But the sort of amorphous one that I think might be bigger than them all is this assumption of control. We can control so many things. We can control the temperature of our car before we get in. You can control the lights from in your house, from your office, and it's almost like we can control our kids like an app, because there's so many different ways of keeping our eyes on them electronically, or putting them in after-school programs and hiring nannies, and you get to the point where you think that if you're not watching your kid every single second, there's something wrong with you, because you could, and if anything bad ever happens to them, it's because you just weren't vigilant enough. And that fear of being on Anderson Cooper trying to explain why you let your kid ride his bike to the library and he never came home again, that fear of losing control of your kid for even a single second and what terrible thing might happen to them makes parents feel like, A, they must be watching their kids all the time, and B, that nobody will stand up for them if something bad happens. There will be no sympathy. It will only be, Facebook accusations. Remember the mom whose kid ended up falling into the gorilla cage in the zoo, like last year or the year before? It was all like, why wasn't she watching her kid? And doesn't she realize it's always dangerous at the zoo? And no child should. It's like, if there's always dangerous at the zoo, it's not a safari. If it was always dangerous, you wouldn't take your kids there. But one horrible, weird thing happens, and everybody's saying she should have known, she should have had the kid Velcroed to her side. There's no sympathy left for when something bad happens to a kid, so we're all the more worried and all the more hovering.
So, Lenore, let's take this to the next level and ask, there are some legitimate concerns for kids' safety. I think most parents would concede that, but how do you balance those legitimate concerns with the really remote dangers, like my kid falling into a gorilla cage?
Gorilla cage. Right. Well, Trevor Butterworth of the organization Stats explained it to me best when I actually was writing the first article about why I let my 9-year-old ride the subway alone. He said, when events are rare and random, you can't plan for them. You can't plan for a meteor falling through your house. Or actually, in New York, there was once a story, it was horrible, of somebody threw a frozen turkey from an overhang above the highway, and it crashed through somebody's windshield. And it's like, well, should we always be worrying about frozen turkeys every time we drive under an overhang. You really can't. But the legitimate worries are the ones that our parents had for us. You must teach your kids how to cross a street safely. You have to teach them to look both ways. And for some reason, we're always taught look left, look right, look left again. I don't really know why. You have to teach your kids in terms of stranger danger. Teaching them stranger danger doesn't help. Teach them that they can talk to anyone, but can't go off with anyone, because that's really much easier for a kid to understand, because who's a stranger? Is the lady at the checkout counter a stranger? Who knows? But if you tell them you just can't go off with anyone, that's very helpful. And besides which, strangers aren't the real danger to kids. Obviously, far more kids are molested by people they know, and so you teach them to recognize, resist, and report, the 3 R's that the Boy Scouts teach kids. Recognize, no one can touch you, wear your bathing suit covers. Resist, run, kick, scream, yell. And report. If anyone tells you, this is a secret between us and you can't tell anybody, keep the lines of communication open with your kid by saying, yes, you can always tell me, and nothing bad will happen to you. I won't be mad at you. So those things are going to keep your kids a lot safer than tracking them with a tracking device and driving them everywhere and never giving them any of the independence, the free time, the fun, the running in the forest, the making forts, the riding your bikes, that most of us really cherish when we look back on our own childhoods. That's like the best part, and we're taking it away from kids out of this sort of misguided notion that if you're not hovering, you're a bad parent.
Now, Lenore, I want you to extend your concerns to children, the way they're being raised, everything you've just discussed. I want you to extend it 30 years into the future and put your prognostication cap on. What do you think is what do you think is
Nobody asked me this.
What do you think is the effect on our society in future generations to come, where the rising generation is being raised in a very dependent way, where you talked a moment ago about the importance of that independence? What happens to our society in the future if the future adults and leaders and voters and everybody else is being raised this way?
Okay, there's like so many different things I want to say about this. First of all, I think we are seeing the results already. You don't have to look 30 years into the future. You can look on college campuses where some students are feeling very afraid simply because they're encountering ideas that they don't like. And I think it's because they're using the word "we don't feel safe" when, say, a Christina Hoff Sommers comes on campus to discuss whether or not rape culture exists. And you can agree or disagree with her, but she's not coming there to physically hurt anyone. She's not coming with an Uzi. So I think it's that kids have been raised with the idea that anything that makes them uncomfortable is automatically unsafe. I mean, that's just the phrasing we've been using. We've been using the word unsafe for everything from, a non-organic grape or sipping from a bottle that has, it's made out of plastic, to actually being, followed by a threatening guy in a white van. So I think we're already seeing students feeling excess fear simply when they feel uncomfortable, and also demanding more oversight because they've always had oversight. They've been driven places instead of organizing their own games in the sandlot. They've been in leagues that were run by adults, and adults decided in or out. Adults decided what they're going to play, when they're going to start, who's going to play what. And they get so used to having somebody else determining how to live their life and even their free time. There is no such thing as free time. That, they're sort of outsourcing the decision-making to adults. And I think that becomes, looking to the authorities to intervene on campus when they feel uncomfortable. Another worry I have is that when kids are unsupervised and they do organize their own games and they have to compromise on what they're going to play and how they're going to play it, and they have to make the teams and they have to do it all themselves, they get practice in democracy. Let's make this work. Okay, I don't agree with you, but we'll play it this way today and another way tomorrow. And that might seem like just fun or playtime or wasted time, but actually it's critical in terms of learning how to live with people who are not the same as you and make things work. And so I worry that if kids aren't just in the daily activity of, deciding that ball was on the line, no, it wasn't, and going forth from there, and maybe being angry, but then deciding, oh heck, let's keep playing. That is so critical. That's the reason kids want to play, and they do play, is because it is a drive as fundamental as the sex drive, and it's in children because Mother Nature put it there, knowing that that's how we're going to learn to get along in society. And if we've taken play, regular old play, out and replaced it with what are basically classes that happen to be in baseball or soccer or whatever, kids haven't learned that fundamental skill of, living in a community. So I do worry that they might be more tolerant of some kind of, I don't know if I want to say totalitarian, government or not, but it seems like you don't want kids to grow up without any kind of resourcefulness, because then they might accept somebody else just telling them what to do.
Along those lines, Lenore, I want to raise can-do kids, and I really think your free-range kids idea is one of the most empowering ones that I've encountered as a parent. However, the risk of someone misinterpreting my child out there exploring and growing and learning to become that can-do individual, there's a chance that they may run into law enforcement or some well-meaning bystander. Well, that kid is unattended. I better call the authorities just in case.
Right.
What do you say to your kids with the understanding that they may have an encounter with authority, and you don't want them to accidentally talk them or you into a meeting with Child Protective Services?
Right. Well, I don't think it's incumbent upon the kid to know exactly what to do. Although, if you go to my site, which is freerangekids.com, and you look on the right-hand side, there's this little. It's free. There's a little thing that's a membership card, and it says, "I'm not lost. I'm a free-range kid. My parents know where I am.
Nice.
They have, and here's their phone number if you want to call them." But what we really have to do is, you don't have to change the kids. You have to change the law. You have to. I'm trying to get cities, towns, states, and eventually the United States to pass what I call the Free Range Kids and Parents Bill of Rights, which is one sentence long at its core, which is that our kids have the right to some unsupervised time, and we have the right to give it to them without getting arrested. So that statement does not say, therefore, we're going to allow any kind of negligence or abuse of kids, and we don't want CPS to exist, and we don't want the cops to ever intervene. No, it says, sure, if a cop sees a kid outside, make sure that the kid's okay. You okay, kid? Yeah. Your parents know where you are? Yeah. Okay, fine. Or if for some reason it gets reported to CPS, the neighbor calls Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services comes and says, what was your kid doing? You say, oh, every afternoon he plays outside with his friend. Then Child Protective Services has to accept a certain amount of freedom on the part of the child, granted by the parent, as not negligent, as normal, and they have to sort of compare what the child is being allowed to do with reality. And the reality is that we are in these safe times in terms of violent crime, and kids are not getting snatched off the street by strangers any more than they're the most dangerous thing for a kid is driving them somewhere. That's the number one way kids die, is as car passengers. So you have to look at the statistical likelihood of real danger that their parents have put them in or not put them in. And if it's not statistically dangerous and crazy, it's not leaving them at home with no food in the refrigerator in a house strewn with, heroin needles, then you can't say that the parent is negligent just because the parent believes in the kid and believes in the community and has taught him to cross the street.
Lenore, I want to tie what you just said and responding to Brian to what happened in Arkansas earlier this year. So, Brian was asking how we counteract this, how we protect against Child Protective Services to allow, children to practice this independence and exactly what you're saying. And you just point out that one of your efforts is to try and change the law so that these concerned citizens, as they call police, as they call Child Protective Services, are met with a, well, thank you for your concern. We checked everything out. It's okay. They have this right. It's not neglect. What happened in Arkansas? Why didn't tell us a little bit about the bill and why it didn't succeed?
Okay, so that bill was actually proposed in the Arkansas state legislature by, in the Senate was by a guy named Clark, Senator Clark. I'm not sure who presented it in the House. Anyways, it passed the Senate. which was great. But when it went to the House of Representatives, there it was stymied. And the reason was that the Speaker of the House said, but I've heard that it only takes 37 seconds to steal a child, to kidnap a child from a car. And, of course, once people start thinking in those dramatic sort of law and order SVU terms, any independence for children seems like a danger. And with that fear planted in people's minds, and it's a fear that was absolutely has no basis in statistical reality, it was voted down. And I'm hoping that they will bring it up again. There's a man named Dan Greenberg who works for an Arkansas Betterment Society who is determined to pass it, because if you pass the Free-Range Kids Bill of Rights, you're not saying that you can leave a kid in a car for 5 hours, and you're not saying that you can, drop off your kid by the side of the road and pick them up a week later. You're just saying, I want to see kids outside again. I want the parks to be filled with kids. I want kids to be riding their bikes to their friend's house and going outside and kicking around a ball. And I don't want the parents to have to worry that allowing that kind of healthy, happy, free childhood, the kind of childhood most of us remember, that they'll be arrested and thrown in jail or have their kids taken away simply because they're happy to live in Arkansas and they think it's a great place to live and they want their kids to enjoy it too. So we really can't keep using the worst case scenario, the what I call worst first thinking. Go to the worst case scenario first and proceed as if it's likely to happen. Oh, the kid is waiting in the car for 3 minutes while you pick up the pizza. What if they're kidnapped and murdered? You can't go to kidnapped and murdered every time you hear that a kid is not directly supervised for a tiny chunk of time. It just means that you're arresting parents who are rational and want to live their lives and want to give their kids, a happy, healthy childhood.
So how did you lose your fear? Or I'm assuming that...
Oh, I don't know. Are you kidding? I'm afraid.
Were you always this way?
I'm a fearful parent. No, I feel like I am a nervous parent. I mean, I really totally believe in helmets and car seats. I believe in seat belts. I believe in mouth guards. I have two fire extinguishers in my kitchen, and I live in New York City, so you can bet that kitchen is very small. But I've always believed in community, I guess it is. I believe that most strangers are good. Most people want to help children, that you get a lot out of being part of the world, that it's not my job to be a jailer to my parent. I mean, what really interests me about all this new technology that allows you to watch your kid, I mean, you can watch them in the crib, and you can watch them when they're walking to school, and you can watch them after. You just watch them from afar. You can read all their texts. You can see who they're talking to. Eventually, you can watch where they're driving and how fast they're driving. And basically, it's from womb to adulthood. You can have a bead on your kid electronically now. And until now, the only people who had to wear something that alerted you to their whereabouts all the time were felons, right? Felons on work release with an ankle bracelet. And so there's something disturbing to me about treating our kids the way we treat felons. I mean, people keep saying, well, this is great. This way I can give my kid the freedom that they want and yet know exactly where they are and who they're with and what they're doing all the time. And I'm like, that's not freedom. Would you consider that freedom if somebody was watching you all the time? Would you have had the same childhood if your parents, had a remote control camera in the tree where you built your fort and they could just watch and make sure that nobody was being hurt and nobody was using a mean word, nobody was bullying? It's this way of constantly supervising your kid that we used to only do with criminals. And people recognized it as a type of prison. And now it's being called freedom.
Now, Lenore, I imagine for parents listening to you right now, they're understanding your rational arguments, but when it comes time to, let their kid go to the park or go to the mall or whatever, the fear sets in. The cultural conditioning steps in. If people were to, if that parent were to pick up your book, Free Range Kids, what type of practical advice would they get to help them overcome that fear and implement the things that you're talking about?
Well, some of it is just about going back to remembering your own childhood and remembering how important it was for you to have your secret place that you went to and your best friend and all of that. But some of it is literally practical. Like one of the pieces of advice I give is nowadays parents drive their kids to the bus stop, something I didn't realize when I was living in Manhattan. And then they wait there, 4 kids, 4 adults, all waiting for the bus to come and to make that successful transfer as if it's, the last the helicopter out of Saigon. And so what I suggest is offer to watch all the other kids. You're there at the bus stop anyway. Say, hey, listen, I don't think our neighborhood is so dangerous that we need 4 adults to keep 4 kids alive between now and the bus arrival. I'll do it. And in that way, you're just gently asserting not only reality, but community, because you're saying we're all in this together. I'll help you. And if everybody feels uncomfortable with that, say, well, listen, I trust you. There's 3 of you here. I'm going to leave my kid here and ask that you watch her. But, of course, I'm happy to do this tomorrow for you. And so you just try to re-knit the community together. I'm trying to do things where towns are going to want to start going free range. I mean, I think we'd all be happier in a town where the kids are outside and you see that and it's just normal. I think it's like an indicator of a town's health in a way. There's a lot of trees, there's a lot of kids, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to figure out a way now. I'm starting a foundation for free range kids where towns where people start getting together almost like consciousness raising, and it's like, okay, you're free range, I'm free range, let's send our kids out together, because frankly it's no fun for kids to go outside and play by themselves anyhow. So I think that if we just try to almost, Lady Bird Johnson, if you remember this, she tried to bring back wildflowers. Wildflowers had died out in Texas. She wanted to bring them back. You have to use seeds. You actually have to plant seeds of wildflowers to bring back the wildflowers. It's using it, it's as unwild as you can get. You are cultivating wildflowers. And I sort of feel that's what we have to do with kids. We have to use sort of some unnatural means. Thursday afternoons, let's not have kids have any after-school activities. Let's have them all be outside together. And then they're outside together, and then they realize it's kind of fun. Actually, I'll tell you one other very simple and free idea I think that could help, which is that after school, from like 3 to 6 p.m., I would like all schools to leave their gyms and their playgrounds open. And maybe, you have one person left on campus. It's the principal, the janitor, it doesn't matter who, just one adult there in case of a real emergency so parents feel safer about it. But other than that, there's no structure and there's no direct supervision. So some kids will play basketball and some kids will make a house and some kids will do jump rope. And at least they get used to being together, making up their own decisions, their own games, without an adult telling them what to do and telling them if they're doing it wrong or right and inserting themselves and saying, now you got to stop, this is getting too rough. You just need kids to start interacting again without a direct adult direction.
Sure.
And so it's free. The school is there anyway. And what you have is the critical mass of kids who are all there after school. So instead of them all taking guitar and Mandarin and this or that, they just have free time. And you could have your kid do 5 days a week or 2 days a week, but they get used to playing again. Because I don't think that all kids are as adept at interacting as we were back when we had to decide what are we going to do today.
Lenore, tell our listeners where they can find more. I imagine this has piqued a lot of interest. Where can people learn about you and about the Free Range Kids movement?
Well, it's pretty easy. I blog at freerangekids.com. Soon when it becomes a foundation, maybe it'll be freerangekids.org, but pretty easy to find. I'm on Twitter at Free Range Kids. I'm on Facebook at Free Range Kids Book. Somebody else has grabbed the name Free Range Kids, which is driving me crazy. I'm really easy to reach in all those places. And actually, if you Google America's Worst Mom, you'll find me
Your
too.
picture comes up.
Yeah, it does.
That's great marketing, if nothing else.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Yeah.
That's great, Lenore. Thank you.
It's a parlor trick. When I meet people on a plane, when I'm finally leaving them, I say, and by the way, after I've gone, just Google America's Worst Mom, and their eyes widen. What?
I had to sit next to you. We will link to all of those links on the show notes page for today, which is societyandthestate.com/8. Lenore, this has been tremendous. We're going to send everyone your way. Thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you, Brian and Connor.
All right. Well, that was a fascinating interview. I've corresponded with Lenore before, and much like I asked toward the end, Brian, I want your take on this as a fellow parent. It seems easy to talk about this stuff, but when it comes time to actually apply it, that's when it's like, I get that it applies to other people's kids, but not mine.
No,
my case is different.
I bought into the fear for a long time, and it was actually my wife who said, you know what? Do you want kids who have to ask permission for every little move that they make? And I went, well, no, I don't. She says, then you need to let them explore and discover. So as a result of that, plus our discussion here with Lenore, I'm going to call off their security detail next time they want to go to the park.
No more Bluetooth responder in their backpack to track their every movement.
They don't have to put on a Kevlar vest anymore just to go out the door.
Well, that was great. Fascinating interview. Hope you guys pick up a copy of Lenore's book. We will link to that and her website and all of her social media, as we said, on today's show notes page, societyandthestate.com/8. We're going to be talking about a very related topic on the next episode, so stay tuned. Brian and I are going to be talking about finding truth in a time of mass deception. So be sure you subscribe, societyandthestate.com, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.